Welcome to Learning with a Girlfriend's Basics for Beginners. Now today we're going to learn the basic parts and functions of a sewing machine. And I'm going to be demonstrating on the Janome 2030 QDC. But keep in mind that every sewing machine will vary on the location and the appearance of these parts. However, these parts should provide the same function for any brand of sewing machine. So you ready to get started? Let's go. Let's take a look first at the bobbin and the bobbin cover, bobbin case. Now, above the bobbin is what is called the bobbin cover, and that's usually very removable simply by clicking over and it will just pop right off. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take that to the side. Inside is where you're going to find the bobbin. Now, this bobbin is actually removable. And this is where you're going to wind thread on this little spool, and this is what actually takes care of the understitch of the stitching on your seam. Okay, so this is what's underneath the bottom of your fabric. All right, very, very important in order to have a nice even stitch and to have your fabric be held together. Once that's removed, you can take a closer look at what is called the bobbin case. Now, the bobbin case is just the housing unit for the bobbin. And that's what allows you to place the bobbin inside, bring the thread up and around, depending on which machine you have, and then that will go and take the thread up through the top. Now let's take a look at the part of the machine that is referred to as the feed dogs. In fact, I'm going to actually remove my presser foot here because I want you to be able to see what that means. The feed dogs are what rides underneath the presser foot. And you'll notice here that there are, it's like a metal teeth, if you will. And the metal teeth is what rides along the bottom of your seam. So as fabric goes through, what happens is it actually comes up and pulls on that fabric. And then it goes back down. And then yet again, it pulls up and comes back down. And feed dogs is what actually feeds the fabric through the machine. The presser foot is what presses and holds the fabric down. Let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. This is what's going to hold the fabric onto those feed dogs that we just referred to. And this is what's going to give stability while we sew. And this presser foot is actually controlled by a lever on the side of your machine. Needles are removable, and this is where your thread is actually going to go through the hole to be able to stitch out. The needle clamp is what holds the needle into place and can be loosened and tightened when needed. All right, so this metal plate is what sits below the needle, and it actually is below the presser foot, has a very small opening here, and this is what's going to allow the bobbin thread to come out through underneath here. It's what brings the thread down below through here to make a complete stitch. So very important to have. You're also going to notice that there's special markings on this plate, which can definitely help when it comes to different seam allowances that you are trying to achieve. All right, on your machine, you're going to notice probably a few different areas along the top. Usually they're metal like this, that these would be referred to as a thread guide. For example, we're using this thread guide when we go to thread the machine. We might be using this thread guide over here when it comes time to wind a bobbin. So just know that those are very important parts of the machine, and that's what's going to help regulate the tension. This little contraption here might be referred to as the spool pin, and that's exactly where our spool of thread is going to fall onto. Okay, that's going to hold it in place. We'll definitely add the little cover here so that the thread stays on. And some machines will have them vertical, some will have them horizontal, and some might have both options. On the very right-hand side of your machine, you're going to find this large round knob, and this is what is referred to as a hand wheel. Now, the purpose of this is what's going to really navigate what's called the take-up lever, which, if we take a look down below, this is what moves the needle up and down. You can see that as I turn my hand wheel towards the right, it goes down. And I'll continue to do that so that it goes up and down, up and down. You'll notice that the take-up lever does the same thing. So both of these items are definitely dependent upon what you're doing over here on the right-hand side. Now, another recommendation is always to turn your wheel towards yourself and not backwards. While I hesitate to talk to you about the stitch selector because it can be so different for every machine, I do want to point you in this direction. If you take a look at your machine, most machines will have printed on the front all of the different stitches. Some may be done as a dial, all right? Some may have a record of it, up at the top. So every machine is a little bit different. But on my machine that I'm using right now, you can see that each of the different stitches have a corresponding number. When I look at the specific number that I want, I can refer up to my screen up here and say, all right, I want to use the number 3 stitch. So I simply would touch my buttons here to go up to 03. You'll notice that 03 is the same number that corresponds down below. I would recommend that you refer to your manufacturer's instruction book to know how your stitch selector works on your machine. As mentioned before with the stitch selector, the same thing goes along with the stitch length selector. On my specific machine, I can simply take a look at this is my stitch selector, this is my width, but this is my length. You'll notice the long stitches right there on the screen. So I'm simply going to press my button over to my stitch length and I can make that longer, or I can shorten those stitches simply by referring to the up or down arrows on my machine. Again, every machine is different. I recommend that you take a look at your manufacturer's instructions to find out exactly how your stitch length selector works. Once again, as I shared about the stitch selector and the stitch length selector, the same applies to the stitch width selector. You're going to notice it here on my screen. Many machines will refer to this with a zigzag stitch because it's going to show us how wide a stitch can be or how short a stitch can be width-wise. When this comes in handy is when we're doing a zigzag stitch, or if we're trying to do decorative stitches, we can really have a great opportunity to widen or shorten the width of those stitches simply by selecting the stitch width selector. Another important component on the machine is the back stitch, just like something you see right here. What that does is if I'm sewing along, and especially if I'm at the beginning of a seam, I may want to make sure and reinforce that stitch so that it doesn't come open. This might be referred to more oftentimes when you are doing a seam like in garment sewing, where you want to make sure and have that seam completely secure at the beginning and at the end. So in order to do that, I'm simply going to press on my back stitch button, and you'll notice here that it is actually, the needle is going up and down in the same place over and over again, therefore reinforcing that stitch. Some machines will actually go backwards while other machines will stay in place. Either way, you have met the same goal of reinforcing that stitch at the beginning of your seam. Your foot controller is what is on the floor, and this is what helps regulate the speed of your stitching. Thanks for learning with the girlfriends today, and happy sewing! Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for even more helpful beginning sewing tips.